Searching for the missing pieces. Genealogy is a lot like putting a jigsaw puzzle together with some of the pieces missing. Sometimes it feels like doing genealogical or historical research is like doing a jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box to guide you. When you begin, you don't know what you are doing, but there are resources and people to help. Throughout the talk this evening, I will include some tips and tools and examples. When I give a presentation, I like to begin with the research process and some terminology. You begin with a plan. Decide which family or person you want to work on, what resources you should check. Then you do your research, making sure that you're always recording the information that you found and where you found it. Then it is important to read everything on the document and analyze the information. This will lead you to other research sources. Not to cite your sources. Now, I have been using Zotero, which is a free program, and I have done it for this project, and I am going to share it with people after the event. You can also use things like just pads of paper, notebooks, etc., or some people like to keep track of all the research on their device. It could be using Evernote, OneNote, a Word document, or something like that. Now, the sources are the form or the container in which the information is found. Is it the original, the first occurrence of it? Or is it an index or a copy? Or is it in a compilation, such as an authored work of family history? Even original materials can have mistakes, so you want to always verify it with various sources. Something like a death record will have both primary and secondary information, or you won't even know who gave it. Primary information is always what you're seeking, but that is not always possible. Primary information is recorded close or at the time of the event by an eyewitness. But even eyewitnesses can make mistakes. If they're nervous, etc., they may not remember accurately what they heard or saw. And of course, the evidence, it answers your question. Does it directly answer the question, or do you need multiple sources to do so? And negative evidence is where you expect to find the information, but it isn't there at all. So we're going to look at searching for some missing pieces. Our wish is to have a complete picture of our ancestry or the project we are working on. We may not at the outset know what we have or where we're going to look for information. In reality, we will always have some missing pieces. We may discover we will find our ancestry goes back to countries we didn't anticipate. When I started out on my research, I didn't realize I had Germanic ancestry. But at the 1992 OGS conference, I discovered at one of the booths where they were selling the book with the history of the Markham Township that, yes, my one ancestor that I was aware of lived in Markham, was included in the book. But when I took it, the book that I purchased that evening back to my room, I discovered it took me back from the Johnsons to the Hemingways to the Stivers, who are Germanic. Our research starts usually at home, but don't forget to check again in boxes that are stored away in closets. You work from the known to the unknown. Always consider time and place. Now, in time, affects what information was recorded, what was kept. When you go back far enough, there weren't official records in some places. Each area of Canada has different regulations in regards to what records were requested, such as birth, marriages, and death. Even the census record is not consistent across Canada. What's available in Canada is not necessarily the same as you are going to find in the United States, perhaps Germany, France, England, etc. So you always have to consider that. When doing a jigsaw puzzle, I was taught to look for the straight edge pieces and corners to develop the framework for the puzzle. Sort out the different colors too. In genealogical research in particular, census records and birth, baptismal, marriage, and death burial records are the foundation records. What goes in the middle to build the story? Land records, wills, court records, photographs, maps, and family stories, etc. I would suggest keeping track of where you might find particular types of records. The Library and Archives Canada is in the process of changing their website. So there is a new census search that you can actually do all the census at once. Family Search also has a census. Both Library and Archives Canada and Family Search, the records are available free. Ancestry, there is a cost, but you also can make use of the ancestry through local libraries and some of the museums and archives. Sometimes I suggest too, for an area where you're new to researching, is checking things like the Family Search Wiki or Cindy's List to find out what kind of records are available, what time period they were available, and just different things you need to learn about when you're researching a new area for the first time. Now, anybody who has done any genealogical research realizes you accumulate a lot of material. You may have piles of files, binders, etc. You may have files on your computer. You may have stored them in OneNote, Evernote, various places, but if you can get everything organized in such a fashion that you can find what you've learned, and then you can be able to plan what the next move is. You always need to just think about what system works best for you. Now, I have both piles, I have folders, I have scraps of paper, I have notebooks, and I have things on my computer. Some very well organized in folders, and much yet to be done. So, we are often reminded to be focused on one question at a time. You develop your plan where that type of information can be found and considering time and place. We often find great finds when we least expect it, just like finding a puzzle piece that has found its way under the sofa. This is my great uncle, Albert Valentine Iles, as identified in my dad's photograph album. Looking at the size of Albert, I suspect it was taken around 1910. Albert was born February 14th, 1892 in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, England. He came to Canada in 1905 with his mother, Emily, and several of his siblings. His father, George, and two of his sisters had emigrated before them, but not at the same time. When I first looked at the 1905 passenger list, I hadn't noticed that two of the girls were not listed with him. It pays to relook at a document and to look at all the details, as it is easy to miss something. Albert doesn't look like a very tall young lad in this picture, but the horses look quite handsome in this photo. So the question is, where is Albert? This is the 1911 census of Canada for Grey North in Derby Township. And the census told me that they were living on part lot 17, concession 3 of Derby. This, as far as I can tell, is at the beginning of Derby Township on the Sunset Strip, right at the outskirts of Owen Sound. Some of the family, of course, are no longer living at home because they're either working out somewhere else or they're married. But Albert should be in the place right behind Edith, but he is not there. Manuel is 15, Harold is 13, and Lillian is 11. Lillian was only 5 when she came to Canada. In 1910, George purchased property in Derby Township on the outskirts of Owen Sound. According to my father, when Albert was born, he was deprived of oxygen, and this affected his mental development. And this was reflected in the 1901 English census. According to Albert's obituary, he died in 1957 in Penetang and had been a resident there for 35 years. So that would make that he was in Penetang starting about 1922. According to my dad, Albert lived in a care facility. I had looked for Albert before, but hadn't found him in the 1911 census. One day when I was taking advantage of a free weekend of newspapers.com and doing what I usually do on such occasions, I do a search and I pick some of my family names. Some of the Owen Sound newspapers are now available there. I put in the surname Iles and the time period about 1905 to 1924, as I was trying to find information on my grandfather, William George Iles, and his connection to Owen Sound brass bands. He formed the Salvation Army Band in 1905, soon after his arrival, and he's been noted as the founder of the Owen Sound City Band, but I have found various dates of when that started. But I also, during this search, learned that Albert had been institutionalized in Aurelia. Now I needed to do another search for Albert in Aurelia in 1911, and I was able to find it. But like any document, there can be errors, and I found them here. Instead of being spelled I-L-E-S, his last name had been entered as I-S-L-E-S. He was located, now it doesn't show on this snippet here, but he was at the OHFM, and the OH stands for Ontario Hospital. I'm not too sure what the F is and M is for. His birth was given in 1891. He was 19 years old. He said he was born in Ontario, of Scotch descent. Canadian, Salvation Army, and NG said not given. So that was no occupation. Well, what is correct is that he was ILES. He was born in 1892, so he would have been 20 years old by then. He was born in England, and he was of English descent. So this reminds us that any record can be incorrect partially or completely. While doing jigsaw puzzles, very few tools are needed. You need a large enough surface for the finished puzzle. Perhaps you have a table devoted to this pastime, so you can work on it as time permits. Or perhaps you are a puzzle person who gets engrossed in the puzzle. Genealogists are known to get engrossed in their research, and time passes quickly. Genealogy has many tools to help a person with their research. In genealogy, you want to find links between each generation so that you know that you are researching the right person. A number of years ago, I was asked if I could assist a person seeking to know more information about her biological father. She knew his name and where he had lived. He had been an American soldier serving in Europe during World War II. To go along with the many documents, I created this diagram to show the relationships, as sometimes a visual representation makes it easier to understand what was discovered. In this case, there was also name changes from the original spelling of in their language. I was fortunate to meet this person when she was visiting friends in Canada. We conversed using an interpreter. I recorded the sources with the abbreviations. So I used census records, Hamburg passenger list, New York passenger list, marriage registrations, military records, indexes, naturalization records, and Social Security index. Now I posted on here 2 mind maps created to explain how these 2 men who lived and owned Sound at the same time and died at the same year were not the same person. That is always tricky because some of the records look very similar, and there is a story that the person who built this one particular house in Owen Sound was the hotel keeper, but it actually was the merchant. So looking at William Ross, the hotel keeper, his name appeared in records under William James Ross, W.J. Ross, W.M.J. Ross, and James Ross. The other record shows William Ross, the merchant who owned and had the house built. And some of his records, he was William Ross, William Thomas Ross, W.M. Ross, and just William Ross. That can make it very difficult if you're trying to sort out information. Middle names help differentiate some of the families. The merchant had a will and codicil, and this helped unravel these 2 people. With the merchant, I was able to locate quite a few ads in the newspaper showing the different types of wares he sold. Now, this was made with a product called MindMap, but the terms of using it now has changed, and to do it for free, it requires public viewing of your mind maps. So there are a number of different programs that you can do mind maps, and I find it's an interesting way to show different relationships as well. Tables can help with sorting out information. I also like to use spreadsheets to prepare timelines to discover gaps in information. Other than the death registrations, the other sources are derivative. These children all died as a result of a house fire. But as you look at the table, you can see how the information varied from one record to the other. Teamwork. Teamwork is always fun if you can help each other with your projects. Now, sometimes a family or friends will get together and put a puzzle together. But during our research, you may need to ask for help. Sometimes just talking through a question with somebody else will help you figure out where you should go next. The Gray County Historical Society received 2 letters from the Passchendaele Museum last month. This is part of an ongoing project of their organization. The first letter concerned John Morrison Lenningham, who was killed in action on October 26, 1917, and a letter sent to his next of kin, Mrs. James Morrison of Dornoch. The other letter concerned George Edwin Spencer, who was killed in action on the very same day, and the letter was sent to his mother, Sarah Spencer, at a postal address at Chatsworth. The letter said they were unable to locate Ontario Chatsworth to a modern address or the Dornoch one. Both of these men are remembered at the Menin Gates. After extensive research, the Passchendaele Museum has been able to identify the wartime burial locations of over 1,400 of the 6,928 missing Canadians remembered on the Menin Gate Memorial to the missing in Ypres, Belgium. In addition to the interactivity maps they are creating for the burial location, birth location, and enlistment location, they are also seeking stories, letters, pictures related to him or his family, photos of where they lived or where they worked. So where is Dornoch, Ontario? Now, this map will give you a little bit of idea. So here is Owen Sound. This is Highway 10 that goes goes to Toronto. And this is Highway 6 that goes towards Guelph, Kitchener, Waterloo that way. The black arrow points to Dornoch. The red arrow locates to where the Lenninghams lived. This map was created with the IGS maps of the Gray County and your county may have done something similar as well. The history of Glenelg Township has information on the Lenningham family, and they were longtime residents in the area. They actually had 4 different lots on Concession 2 east of the Garifraxer Road. Isabella lived on the family farm very close to the Lenninghams, and that's how she met James. John's birth registration gives Lot 2, Concession 2 Glenelg, but doesn't include the east of the Garifraxer Road designation. So on the map that was done with the GIS tools of the Gray County, I have indicated with the yellow arrow pointing to the area where John would have been born. John is remembered on the website of the 4th Canadian Mounted Rifles. The tower at the Presbyterian Church at Dornoch has a plaque in his memory and includes the others from the area. Not shown on this slide is a memorial to him as a teacher at SS Holland No. 3. In the history of Glenelg Township says he was a teacher at Moggy School in 1917, but that is incorrect as he listed May 3rd, 1916. 2 of the pupils of the school also enlisted, Howard Marsh and Otto Molson. They all died at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. A large picture of the 3 men hung on the front wall of the school until it closed in 1965. This shows his photo with his brother served, but returned because he was on sick leave that day. Now this is showing the project of the Passchendaele Museum. It's an interactive map. So the first step is to go to their search box and include what information you have. And it's important to scroll right down in that particular box to where it says submit. Then you may have to zoom out to see the location of where his burial has been identified. Then you click on the little red dot, and that will bring you to information about him. His date of birth, place of birth, his age, etc., where he signed up, etc. If you scroll down in that box, then you can look at another map, which can be place of birth, last known residence, where they enlisted, and their place of, you can get the map of the place of death. So here is a map of his place of birth. But because they only knew it was a Dornoch, they couldn't put it over to where he actually lives. So we'll now look at the other young man. When George's information was put into the database, all they knew that it was he was born in Grey County, Ontario, Canada. And his last known residence was the Comley House in Owen Sound. Now, when he died, the letter went to his mother, Mrs. Sarah Spencer of RR4, Chatsworth, Ontario. In this page, I have shown some of his attestation paper. So the picture is showing the hotel. He is a farmer. Now, it says his location of his next of kin, his mother, Mrs. Sarah Spencer, looks like Elm Hedge, Ontario, Canada. I did a search to find out if there's such a place, and there isn't. So I thought, okay, what could it be? So I thought, it likely is Elm Hedge. I looked at a finding aid that I created a number of years ago, and it said it was in St. Vincent Township. I also found it on the Ontario Commercial Yearbook and Gazetteer for 1906. So it's a very small place, not too far from Meaford. Also, a good place to look for information on places in Canada is the Canadian Geographical Names Database. It also gives you an idea how far one place is from another. I looked at George's military records to see what kind of information it included, because I had a sense that he had moved often in his life. And in his military record includes his will. His next of kin is his mother, Mrs. Sarah Spencer, RR number 1 in Meaford. So that matches up with Elm Hedge. His other record shows here that they have done a correction to his address, and his next of kin is now at RR number 5, Chatsworth, at the time of his death. I was also able to find in the Bruce Gray and Ranch Ontario Genealogical Society surname collection a picture of George, but it was not in the newspaper until the 25th of January of 1918. One piece of important information that's in here, it says, Private Spencer's home is at Massey. So I'm on this map. To the left is Keppel Township in 1880. And where he was born was in Parkhead, which is on the outskirts of Keppel, and right beside it is Amabel Township. His birth was recorded in the Keppel Township. Here is Owen Sound. There's Brook. You can just see exactly where it is located. The other map shows Holland Township. This is where Massey is. And this is showing where Chatsworth is. When you're doing any type of research, sometimes you have to research people other than the person themselves. Looking at friends or family, their associates have saved their work people or the people they're in an organization with, their neighbors. Sometimes that helps you figure out who they married, who their witnesses at different weddings, their wills, etc. I created a timeline for Edwin. This one is a little different. Quite often I'll do them just in a spreadsheet because I'll be putting a lot of information, the date of birth, location, ages, what sources I found it. But to give a visual idea of how George moved at different times in his life. So he started his life in 1896 in Keppel Township in Parkhead. By the 1901 census, they're still in the same locality as far as we can tell. By 1911, they were in Derby Township. And I figured this location was on the, what we call the bypass of Owen Sound, just south of Springmount. Then when he attested, he was shown at the Comley House, but his mother was at Elm Hedge. He died in Belgium. When his mother was notified of his death, they were living at RR5 Chatsworth, but we didn't know exactly where that was. But with the photo in the newspaper, it is also indicating that he was at Massey. And his father and mother and some of his siblings were still living in 1921, but they're in Derby Township. But at this point in time, they are living around Kilsyth. How I discovered this was that their neighbors were George and Mary Wiley. George and Mary Wiley lived in the Kilsyth area, and I discovered this information from the history of the Fleming family of Derby Township. So one thing I did when I was researching, I thought, why not I look at see what artificial intelligence would say about comparing researching your family history and being like a jigsaw puzzle. So how is researching your family history like a jigsaw puzzle? Using the artificial intelligence in Canva Doc Magic Writes, it says, it requires patience, persistence, and dedication to piece together the pieces of the puzzle. It takes time and effort to find the right sources of information, to analyze and interpret them, and to draw connections between them. As you uncover more information, you'll begin to see the bigger picture of your family's history, like when you fill in the jigsaw puzzle. It can be both exciting and rewarding as you uncover new information and gain a better understanding of your family's past. So if you have any questions, we have lots of time to answer them. And if you go to the chat and look for Nicole's name, and she will share the questions with me.
So there's a couple of questions, Janet, already.
Okay, I'm going to put my video, I'm going to stop my share. And I will, okay. Okay, fire away. Let's see if I can answer them.
Well, the first is quite a number of people were wondering if there would be a handout, and I let them know that it was being recorded and posted to YouTube, but I didn't know if you were planning on sharing the PowerPoint presentation.
I will be doing a handout with the web addresses and different sources.
That's great. And then Don Ross had a question about the new formatting of census data. He's wondering whether the original census books will still be available. He had apparently several breakthroughs by going back over census info, which he thought he had finished with. And then suddenly 5 years later, he realized that the family of Agar in Lanark in 1851 was really Edgar, who later moved to Chatsworth in Grey County. And some of the neighbors moved with them. So that's from Don Ross in Aurelia, just wondering if the formatting of census data that's new is going to, I guess, affect access to it.
I'm not aware of any changes to do with what you see with census records. Maybe he can explain a little bit more. What new format has he seen?
Don, I've asked you to unmute if you can. Maybe you could explain a bit more about your question.
Okay, I've lost the window for a minute. Sorry. The new format gives a whole string. When you put in a name, it'll give you a whole string of census pages that are all connected with that name or with that location or something like that. For like from the 51 right on through to the 1911 census. So, but I don't know whether you can still be able to find, I mean, I always go back to the original census pages right now, and that's how you can find who the neighbors are. That's the most important thing I'm looking for these days. And misspellings that I overlooked in the previous age when I was first starting out. And all of a sudden I see where there's been a transcription error, but that's on the original, and suddenly you get a clue as to what really was transpiring on those original census pages. So I hope we don't lose those with the way they're restructuring the census information.
Can
Thanks,
you tell
Don.
me where they're restructuring the information? I'm just not too sure where you're seeing it.
Oh, I see it on the census page. There's a new version of a census page that you can go to if you wish. And it's because they're changing the profile of the census pages.
But are you seeing it at National Library and Archives Canada or Ancestry, or which program?
No, I never go on Ancestry, so it's all on LAC.
Okay. I haven't noticed any changes, but I haven't been using the new format of the search engine that has been created, where you could actually search them all at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking of is, I hope that doesn't imperil the access to the original pages of the census books.
Hmm.
I'll take a look at it and I can maybe add that to my notes.
That sounds like a good idea.
I'll
We
just
have
take a look.
another question, Janet, regarding Lovell directories.
Yes.
Are there any of them online, and where would you find them?
If they're online, a couple places I would think of would be Canadiana or archive.org.
And that question was from Allison Atgangor. I hope I pronounced her name correctly.
So the level question online. Okay. I'll give some bonus. I'll put some bonus notes.
Sure. And then there's a question from Julie Hewitson, who is interested in her family who immigrated to the Dornoch Bentink area. And she's wondering in your research whether you've ever run into the last name Hewitson.
Not in Bentink or that area. They're certainly in Derby Township. There's a very good Bentink Township history, quite a large book. I don't imagine it will be online because it's a fairly recent work.
And there's a helpful hint from Chuck Buckley, who says another useful site is geneofund.on.ca. And he shared that with everyone, so you can look at the link in your chat. And I think that's it for now, Janet.
So are there any other questions? If you have any other question, we certainly have a few minutes. Or are there any more questions?
Does the Historical Society have any of its own records?
We do not have a repository of our own. We direct people to the Grey County Museum and Archives at Grey Roots. And some of the materials of the Owen Sound Historical Society had in the past were donated to the Grey Roots when they folded, and there are some materials that belong to Grey County Historical Society that are there also.
That's helpful. And Kathleen McIntosh has is related, I guess, to the MacArthur family, who arrived from the Isle of Mull to the Glenelg area in the mid-1840s. And Kathleen's wondering where the best place would be for her to find out information about them.
Of course, the Glenelg Township book is excellent. Because Glenelg is in West Grey, I would also check the West Grey libraries. In particular, the Durham Public Library has a good local history section, so they would be worth checking. The West Grey libraries also have a database online for obituaries. And that is where I found that the Lettinghams were buried in, some of them were buried in Durham and not in Latona.
And if you're still willing to take a couple, we have a few more that have
Yep.
come in, Janet.
Sure.
Christy Kaiser is asking if there are burial records available for Grey County cemeteries at the Society or the Grey County Museum. And she means not headstone lists, but actual document tracking burials at the cemeteries.
At one time, Owen Sound, the Greenwood Cemetery, had their records online with at least the name, the age, the date of burial, the date of death, and the plot number. But then they took them down after some of the privacy rules came into place, but also when the city website got hacked, they decided not to. They didn't go back up. So your best bet is to contact the local cemetery to see if they are buried there.
And then Jan Murphy has shared with everyone a link to online directories at theancestorhunt.com.
He has an excellent site. He not only has directories, he has listings of newspapers that are available to view for free, the digital copies of newspapers. His website is excellent.
That's great. And one of our listeners has found it interesting to learn about the Lettinghams as they are in her family tree. She's doing research on Frances Helen or Helen Francis. And I don't know, maybe you can get in touch. Someone else has Lettinghams in their tree as well, but they don't think they have a John. So,
but it could even be a cousin or because of the size of the families. If the Lettinghams are, especially if they're a Glenelg connection. Some of the family also were in Bantic Township, and that's very possible when you think of the fact that it's only a dividing of a highway that takes you from Glenelg to Bantic. And they're really interested in getting pictures, knowing more about the family, pictures of the schools they went to, where they lived. I don't know if the Lettingham house is still there. The one that was on Lot 1, it said in the book that had been torn down, but the one at Lot 2 may still be there.
and I think I apologize if I've missed anybody's questions, but I think we caught most of them. So maybe
It has been interesting sharing some of these secrets with that Janet has provided, and it brings us closer as a Grey County family. And appreciate Janet's presentation. There's lots to learn from it if we can access the YouTube when it comes out, and also the notes that come, particularly all of those websites that have shown up in the chat boxes. We'd appreciate that. And it's good to see such a tremendous response to our program tonight. And appreciate you being with us. And share some of your sunshine in warmer weather, particularly there from Pennsylvania. We're not too bad, but we'll take more. Thank you, Janet, for your work.
Yeah, I did notice one question. Sorry, Lee, as you wrap up, that wondering where people could find the presentation. Are you going to put that on our Grey Society website?
I will post it to the Grey County Historical Society website, the Facebook pages of the Grey County Historical Society, the Bruce and Grey Branch Ontario Genealogical Society. But if you go to YouTube and you search my name, Janet Iles, I-L-E-S, you will find not only in the search, you will find this webinar. You will find the webinar that I did for Gray Roots in 2021. And you will find a short interview that I was interviewed while I helped somebody with their research. And I discovered it yesterday on YouTube. They recorded me while I was at Gray Roots talking to them. So I will try to get the book. Plus, I have everybody's emails. And everybody that registered, I have emails as well.
Thank you, Janet, so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I know in the Historical Society, we lean on Janet an awful lot. And I appreciate the work she puts into it all. With that, it's 8 o'clock. I thank you. Thank you for your attention and your attendance. And we trust that you have found this to be beneficial and a good time had by all. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Janet.
You're welcome.
That was really well done, Janet. And I love the fact that you were able to do so much research on those two young men that we received letters about. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Well, there's actually more than I told.
Yes, I'm sure. Like you say, it just grows, right? So that was really interesting. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So, Janet, just as everybody's signing off, I noticed that it wasn't recording when you
I
started
see that,
speaking.
yes.
So
Yeah.
I pushed the recording button and I had it come to my computer.
Okay,
So maybe we can chat later about what to do next.
okay. Yeah, and I just had, and of course, I didn't set it, so now I started.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay,